So I'm just going to go right ahead if you don't have anything else to add. It's very much a privilege for me to be your speaker today. Although listening to the previous webinars, it's made me quite a bit humble considering the task at hand. But I do hope that my background, which is very different to the others I've seen, will bring a new and diverse angle. And as Bonnie mentioned, my upbringing in my life has been mainly Europe-centric, plus a fair amount of traveling and working in other parts of the world. But I still believe that my worldview might be somewhat different to many others. But today I'm not here to talk about my career and where it's brought me more than in passing. Today I'm rather here to talk about what happens when life is suddenly and unexpectedly turned upside down and inside out all at the same time. And you may be wondering what that has to do with the BYU Management Society theme of growing moral and ethical leadership around the world. But I do believe that my story will have applications both on an individual level as well as on an aggregated leadership level. My experience isn't unique. And if you haven't already faced something similar, it's likely that you one day will. And the likelihood is close to 100% that you will come across others in your vicinity dealing with similar struggles, whether at work, within your family or a circle of friends and your communities. So I hope that you'll be able to see past the details of what is really my story to see the parallels that may be of value to you. But I'm going to start by, I'll start from the very beginning to set the scene. Growing up, I had a very happy and positive outlook on life. And I was sure of happy endings and being able to conquer mind over matter no matter what. And I regarded challenges and setbacks simply as opportunities to grow and develop. I grew up with a very strong sense of being able to accomplish what I set my mind to. And I believed that hard work and strong determination would be enough to shape my future in the direction I wanted. And I knew that no matter what, things would turn out well in the end. Just like the fairy tales, there may be a challenge or a few, but then they all lived happily ever after. And for many years, I would say that that strategy actually worked. I would even say it worked well. There were definitely struggles, there were setbacks along the way, but I did feel as though I could retain a clear vision of the light at the end of the tunnel. And in the end, I was made stronger by overcoming those difficulties. And I felt that I could see incremental, although somewhat unevenly distributed, growth. But you know, sometimes you can clearly divide your life into before and after. And now as we're going to fast forward to the detour that I mentioned in the title of this webinar, I had one of those days that then turned into a whole lot of days. Yeah, this is going to get personal. So a few days before this D-Day, so to speak, I was on a business trip to China, and the company I was working for at the time, they asked me if I would relocate to China to take up a new position. And we had then tentatively said yes. So life was exciting with a brand new adventure looming ahead. And the day after my 31st birthday, I hopped on a plane to Argentina for a week of negotiations, business meetings, after which I was going to come home and to go on a long-awaited vacation to see family in South Africa. Except that trip to South Africa never happened. After a couple of days in Argentina, I found it strange that my husband hadn't replied to any of my text messages, nor answered when I called him. So while in a meeting, I logged into his email account and I realized he hadn't opened his emails for 3 days. So then I checked our home alarm system log and I saw that he hadn't touched it for 3 days. And by now, as you can guess, I was struggling to concentrate on the discussions in the meeting. So I sent a text message to a friend asking him if he'd heard from my husband. And he quickly replied, no, I haven't. But he promised they would drive over right away to make sure that everything was okay. And a while later, our friend sent me a text message saying that our car was there, the lights were on, but nobody opened the door. And it was at that point that I felt a surge of panic well up inside of me. And I never panic over anything. So that feeling in and of itself was enough to tell me that something was really wrong. So I excused myself, I left the room, I went to the bathroom, and I said a very quick but a very sincere prayer. And I said, Heavenly Father, please, whatever's going on, make sure it's fixable. I remember feeling some kind of peace as I called my friend, who was by then waiting for the police to arrive. And a while later, I called him again. And when he answered the phone by sniffling, Ellen, I'm so very, very sorry. I just knew that my worst nightmare had come true. And in that moment, I knew that life as I'd known it would never be the same, although I had no idea what was waiting. I remember thinking, I can't be a widow. I just turned 31 the other day, but it didn't change the reality of what had happened. Excuse me for a second. I'm not here today to dwell on the details of that day or on the days that followed, but I'm rather going to summarize it by saying that in the early days, what most surprised me was the limitless darkness and the bottomless depth of the black hole that I felt inside, and the fact that absolutely nothing helped. I can actually count on the one hand the very few things that made me feel even a tiny amount better for just a few moments, but nothing could take away that darkness. And that's actually what surprised me the most, because I'd grown up with these stories of people suffering unspeakable sorrow, and despite that, feeling angels lifting them up and comforting them and being filled with joy and peace. And I felt nothing of that in the beginning, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why. It seemed as though I not only had to deal with the greatest trauma of my life, I also had to do it blindly. And I didn't feel as though that was my own fault, so I just couldn't understand it. Excuse me. I never felt angry with the Lord for allowing this to happen, not even for a second, but I do remember that I repeatedly told him in prayer, surely you must know that I'm not strong enough to handle this. And I was bewildered. I didn't feel that the heavens opened in my hour of need. Rather, it never felt further away than those first few weeks, even though I prayed with all of my heart and bearing my soul. But there were a couple of exceptions. On one occasion, I had what was one of the most honest prayers of my life. I genuinely felt inspired to thank the Lord for his trust in me. And I remember praying, I really don't like what's happened, but I thank thee for having so much trust in me to think that I would be able to survive this, although I don't feel that way myself. And I certainly didn't feel grateful for the trial itself, and I would have changed things in an instant if I could. But I was open in expressing my appreciation for and declaring my bond to my Heavenly Father. I could feel gratitude for his love for me and for his vision of who I am. And the heavens felt very close in that particular moment. And I remember having a profound insight one day as I was wondering why I didn't feel as though the heavens were wide open to me. I had the thought, think of Joseph Smith and his first vision. And that's when I realized that before Joseph was given the glorious vision of heavenly beings, he first went through a period of thick darkness. He describes it as though it seemed to him for a time as if he were doomed to sudden destruction. At the very moment when he was ready to sink into despair and abandon himself to destruction, that's when the light gradually started to descend upon him. And so I realized that this was my Joseph moment. This was when I had to decide whether I would abandon myself to destruction, or if I was prepared to hold on, to persevere, and whether or not I would exert all of my powers to call upon God to deliver me. And with that realization came an immense determination to confirm my willingness to the Lord, that I was in fact willing to wait for as long as it took until I would see light entering into my life again. And my own questioning of the lack of light actually completely disappeared once I understood that this was my own sacred grove moment. In fact, that part of the trial was no longer a trial once my perspective had changed, which, as a side note, is a parallel to another episode in Joseph Smith's life in Liberty Jail, when God responds to his desperate pleas with glorious revelation instead of immediate release. This was not planned. So far, I've realized that my story has been quite grim rather than uplifting. And without taking anything away from the fact that the coming weeks and months and years after that day have been more of an uphill struggle than I ever thought I could face. Now I'd like to talk about a few things that in hindsight have turned out to be invaluable lessons that I'll always carry with me. As I started preparing for this assignment, the very first thing I came across was a quote by Jeffrey R. Holland, and I'm going to bring it up on the screen. Let's see, there we go. And when we have learned what we need to learn and have brought with us the best that we have experienced, then we should look ahead and remember that faith is always pointed towards the future. Faith has to do with blessings and truths and events that will yet be efficacious in our lives. Please remember this. Faith trusts that God has great things in store for each of us, and that Christ truly is the high priest of good things to come. Hebrews 9:11. I love this quote, but if I may add some of my own thoughts to it, faith isn't just pointed towards the future. It doesn't just say, someday in the future I'll be okay. Although at a certain stage in the depths of despair, that's definitely good enough. But faith also says, I'm okay today. And I'm okay with the things went in the past, because I know that these things work together for my good. Faith isn't just peace in the future. It's also peace in the present, and peace in what has irrevocably happened in the past. Faith gives us peace throughout all stages of time, past, present, and future. Maybe you've heard of Martin Luther and his 95 Theses that he allegedly nailed to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, ushering in the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Well, many years ago, I started putting together Ellen's theses. I still haven't decided which Castle Church door to nail them to, so if you have any suggestions, you can just pass them on to me afterwards. But anyway, I started writing down the pillars of my own faith, and it's a list that I still work on from time to time. And by the way, that's an activity I can highly recommend to any and all who want to deepen their faith. And some of those insights that have been more closely linked to this period of my life, I'd like to share some of those with you today. So this is basically a summary of how my experiences have changed me and what I've learned and how I'm different because of it. I want to start with a quote from the New Testament, or a story from the New Testament, the parable of the 10 virgins. It's taken on new meaning to me, a deeply personal meaning. And I realized that to me, the parable isn't so much about my preparation for Christ's second coming, although it certainly is that as well, but rather my own personal preparation for when life's toughest trials strike. You may have heard the old saying, when opportunity knocks on the door, the time for preparation is past. And I once heard Merlin K. Jensen describe it this way. Good times are times for building faith. Hard times are times for using faith. And now looking back at this period of my life, the vantage point of being a few years down the line, the one thing that I'm the most grateful for is the realization that my faith in God was strong enough to withstand the most brutal trial I could have imagined. And at the time, I understood very clearly that when disaster struck, there was no time and no room to start questioning whether or not I believed in God, or whether or not I believe that He loves me and all of His children, and whether or not I believe that He has a plan for all of us. As I was going through this, I already knew those things deep down from the bottom of my heart without having to question them. And that realization is what I'm infinitely grateful for. Another of my absolute heroes, Neil A. Maxwell, he expressed it somewhat differently. And I'm going to show you this quote as well. He said, "To be untested and unproven is also to be unaware of all that we are." So I'd say that's been my biggest takeaway. An understanding of who I am rather than who Christ is, because He knew all along who I was and what I was capable of. But it wasn't until my carefully constructed foundation completely fell apart that I got a glimpse of who I really was, when there was nothing left but rubble. I've heard a saying that I truly believe in, and it is, grief doesn't change you, grief reveals you. And I would say that the grief and the black hole I described that I've experienced have revealed my convictions rather than changed them or strengthened them. I don't believe God needed this to happen in order for Him to get a good idea of who I am, but it's been a gift from Him to help me understand more about who I am. And then it turned out that I knew all along who and what He is to me. Another parallel that's become holy ground to me is the experiences that Joseph Smith and a few others had while being unjustly imprisoned in Liberty Jail. And I absolutely don't want to make it sound as though I'm comparing myself to any of those spiritual giants and the incomparable hardships that they had to endure. But there is one parallel that I believe is open to all of us. I want to share another quote by Jeffrey R. Holland. Except I can't see because the screen's in the way. Okay, I'm gonna show a different views to make sure that I can see all of the text. Okay. I actually can't see the top of it. Let's see if I can move the, yeah, there we go. Most of us, most of the time, speak of the facility at Liberty as a jail or a prison. And certainly it was that. But Elder Brigham H. Roberts, in recording the history of the church, spoke of the facility as a temple, or more accurately, a prison temple. As we think on these things, does it strike us that spiritual experience, revelatory experience, sacred experience can come to every one of us in all the many and varied stages and circumstances of our lives, if we want it, if we hold on and pray on, and if we keep our faith strong through our difficulties? Tonight's message is that when you have to, you can have sacred, revelatory, profoundly instructive experience with the Lord in any situation you're in. Indeed, let me say that even a little stronger. You can have sacred, revelatory, profoundly instructive experience with the Lord in the most miserable experiences of your life. Every one of us, in one way or another, great or small, dramatic or incidental, is going to spend a little time in Liberty Jail, spiritually speaking. We will face things we do not want to face for reasons that may not have been our fault. Indeed, we may face difficult circumstances for reasons that were absolutely right and proper, reasons that came because we were trying to keep the commandments of the Lord. We may face persecution. We may endure heartache and separation from loved ones. We may be hungry and cold and forlorn. Yes, before our lives are over, we may all be given a little taste of what the prophets faced often in their lives. But the lessons of the winter of 1838 through 39 teach us that every experience can become a redemptive experience if we remain bonded to our Father in heaven through that difficulty. These difficult lessons teach us that man's extremity is God's opportunity. And if we will be humble and faithful, if we will be believing and not curse God for our problems, He can turn the unfair and inhumane and debilitating prisons of our lives into temples, or at least into a circumstance that can bring comfort and revelation, divine companionship and peace. My own experiences have profoundly changed how I deal with others who are grieving. I've now learned that there's a grief community that, however, isn't just exclusive to people having lost someone to death. And I feel a sense of responsibility and absolute willingness to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort, in a way that before I didn't understand from the inside, only from the outside. I've learned so many things I didn't want to understand or learn firsthand about grief. I approach grief very differently today, both in myself and in others. For instance, look up toxic positivity if you're not already familiar with the concept. And I'm grateful for being able to use those experiences to help others. And I've seen the need for empathy, both towards ourselves, giving ourselves grace, where some days survival is just good enough, but also in dealing with others. And deep sorrow, whether that be my own or that of others, is now a familiar landscape for me. It didn't used to be. Another experience that I had years before all of this happened later took on new meaning. One day, my former manager that I had when working for the church in France called me in my office in Germany and said that a friend of mine from our YSA group, our youth group, was severely ill. He had a very aggressive tumor and it was unclear whether or not he was going to make it. So we all prayed and fasted for him. But within only a matter of a few days, he passed away. And my heart broke for his wife of only a few months, as she was also a dear friend from our youth group. 2 or 3 days after receiving the devastating news, I visited the temple in Frankfurt. And as I entered the celestial room, she was sitting there, together with the new father-in-law. And I sat down next to her, and we just cried together. And in that moment, I prayed for her and the unfathomable grief that she must be going through. But I very distinctly also remember telling God, please don't ever give me her trial. Give me any other trial, but not this one. And I've never said that prayer about anything else, neither before or after that event. So then fast forward about 8 years, and that worst nightmare did in fact come true for me as well. And this is when another quote by Elder Maxwell is appropriate to add. I'm going to bring this up here. If we are serious about our discipleship, Jesus will eventually request each of us to do those very things which are the most difficult for us to do. And speaking of young people with cancer, although it's not a very happy topic, but there's another principle that's profoundly changed my faith in my life. In 2013, David A. Bednar gave a devotional in which he told a true story about a young couple that he had met with, where the husband, after only a few short weeks of marriage, had been diagnosed with a severe form of cancer. Elder Bednar visited with this couple and felt impressed to ask them both if they had faith to be healed. And they confirmed that they did. But then he also felt impressed to ask them, do you also have faith not to be healed? And this is where life gets trickier. Excuse me. It might be easy to believe in sunshine and roses, but what about the rainy days? And what about when the roses have thorns on them? Are we equally sure of God's love for us then? And are we equally willing to accept his will when it turns out to be so vastly different from the outcome that we're hoping for? I need to ensure that my faith is solid enough, even on days when it feels as though my faith doesn't bring the kind of healing that I'm hoping for. There's also something to be said about compensation, whether immediate or delayed. And I want to share a few more wise words from people who are much wiser than I am. This is by Joseph B. Worthlin. The Lord compensates the faithful for every loss. That which is taken away from those who love the Lord will be added unto them in his own way. While it may not come at the time we desire, the faithful will know that every tear today will eventually be returned 100-fold with tears of rejoicing and gratitude. And then another quote. I just love quotes. And this one is also by Neil A. Maxwell. The carving that suffering has carved upon our souls will one day be the receptacle of joy. How's that for a principle of compensation? And then we also, another favorite thinker of mine, our very own dear Bonnie Oscarson. She said, we often refer to the scripture that where much is given, much is required. I believe that a close corollary to this is that where much is required, much more will be given. And I truly believe in that balance. Also adding that patience is a crucial component to that statement. And I can't say that I've seen the full extent of those blessings revealed in my life at this time, but I have seen inklings of them. And I do have full faith that one day I'll be able to look my Savior in the eyes and thank him for his matchless gifts. I truly believe in a glorious future, but I'm also grateful for a past that's rich with growth-inducing experiences. And from the rooftops, I want to praise my Father in heaven for a blessed present. He is there throughout our lives, past, present, and future. Thank you. I believe we're going to open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing such a personal story, but so beautiful, and we really appreciate you opening up to us and sharing a little more about your faith. We received a lot of comments that people just loved the quotes that you shared too in your slides. So if you would be okay with it, If you give us your approval, we would love to be able to share those with people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we do have one question from someone in the Q&A, and this is what they asked. They said, I have been through the loss of lots of people I love in these past couple of years. What are some things that helped you most during the first months after the passing of your husband?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have a dear friend who's a grief counselor. And I remember that I came to her and I said, please tell me, how do I survive? And she said, each person holds the key of healing inside. And she said, your job is to try to listen to that voice that tells you what you need in order to get through this, and then try to get to make sure that you get what you need, so to speak. Because grief is a very deeply personal experience, and it's very, very different. And some people were trying to help because they had some kind of grief experience, and they would just do it their way, thinking that they knew better. And for me, that wasn't helpful. So what did help was just to allow things to happen. They talk about children grieving. Children can laugh the 1 second and cry the next. And they said that's actually the healthy way to follow your emotions, because sometimes when it's overwhelming, you just can't deal with it. And other times you're more able to deal with it. So what I would say is try to listen to that inner voice, because within yourself is the key to healing. And whether that be grief from losing someone or going through a difficult stage, just try to be honest to that voice and try to make sure that that's what you get. And I would say that for me, healing came naturally. It took longer than I would have wanted to, but it came naturally. And I tried to, it's almost like a roller coaster. You just kind of have to hang on for the ride and know that eventually it is going to slow down. So that was what helped me at first. But again, grief is deeply personal, and we need to respect the way that people grieve in different ways.
Thank you, Ellen. That was a great answer. We received another question as well. It says, was there anything which well-wishing individuals said or did that unintentionally caused more pain?
Absolutely. I could write a book. It would be a long book. So the one thing is that people wanting to help, they think that their way of helping is to try to make my grief go away. And so they say, oh, don't cry because he wouldn't want you to cry. Well, that doesn't stop me crying. Or they would say, oh, don't cry because you're going to see him again. And I thought, I know I'm going to see him again. That's not the problem. Or, oh, don't cry. You're young enough to find somebody else. Yeah. So I think remove the thought that you need to fix this problem for the grieving person. You can't. What you can do is that you can be there for them. You can hold them, you can cry with them, and you can tell them that I'm not going to leave you. A lot of people said, oh, call me if you need anything. I wasn't able to identify what I needed. What was helpful was people who said, right, can I bring you some food? Or would you want to go for a walk? Or yeah, whatever might be needed. So I think taking away the whole idea of people think that they need to fix somebody's grief by taking it away and coming with these, like you said, well-intentioned phrases, but they just don't work. The best way is just to allow the person to feel what they're feeling in the moment. If they're laughing for a moment because they had a good moment, well, laugh with them. And if they're crying, cry with them. And eventually those roller coaster dips and valleys, they're gonna even out.
Thank you. That's great advice for sure. So we appreciate that as well. And kind of going along with that, you mentioned a few things, but we received a question as well that says, how can I be of help to someone who is going through a difficult time, even though they are doing their best?
Yeah. So one thing is that I think that we're in our society today, we're afraid of grief. We're afraid of sadness. We tend to make pathology out of it instead of realizing that this is a normal part of life. And so some of the things that you can do is, first of all, respect the person. I would say that most people grieve in healthy ways. Some don't. And obviously you need to be on the side so you can make sure that they're getting fed and drinking enough water and getting sleep, etc. But be there by their side. I and put your burden on somebody else. So be there for them at the moment. And I would say just try to get the basic needs fulfilled. Make sure that they get to sleep. Make sure that they have water to drink, food. Some people tend to eat their way out of grief. I starve my way out of grief. So just follow their physical cues, so to speak. But yeah, just be there and accept the fact that this is going to take a while. It's not just going to be a couple of months and then, people tend to, yeah, that's another point. People tend to talk about getting back to normal. And there is no normal. There is absolutely nothing normal about this. However, eventually you'll be able to rebuild your life in a new way around the big hole that used to be your life. It doesn't mean that life's going to be bad. Life is going to be good again. But when somebody's so deep in their, what I call black hole, it's not going to be helpful to say, well, you'll get over this, or don't worry, you'll be fine again. Because that's just trying to make the true feeling go away. Whereas just saying, okay, I cannot imagine how hard this will be. I'm here for you. And just trusting the process, because you do have the key to healing inside of you.
Thank you. Another question we received is, how has this life-changing experience influenced you as a leader in your professional life?
Oh, good question. Really, really good question. And I would say with a lot more empathy. That's the one thing. And also realizing, because it's incredible, after this has happened, I've come across so many people who either lost a spouse or a child or a parent, and grieving people are everywhere. We kind of tend to not see them because it's something that we're not used to as a society. We're kind of grief averse. And so I would almost be the opposite. If I know of somebody who's lost somebody close to them, I would quite easily go say, right, I heard about what happened, and I'm so terribly sorry. And I just wanted to know that I'm here for you, because I think just witnessing their pain and being there for them is what you can do to help. I remember there were so many people who were afraid to look me in the eyes, who were afraid to say hello. I don't know if they were afraid that I was going to start crying or something. I don't know. But not being afraid of the difficult aspects of life. I think that's the one thing. I had my manager at the time. Luckily, he was really good in how he handled it, and he told me afterwards he had no idea what to do or what to say. But a person who's grieving deeply tend to be very vulnerable. And he just said to me in the beginning, he said, you take the lead. You tell me how much you want to work. If you need to go home someday, that's not going to be a problem. And he said, just remember that you don't have to prove anything. You've already proven who you are. So we're here for you. Just try to get back to being okay, first of all. Don't try to perform, because just take your time for this. And that took the pressure off me immensely. Thinking that, okay, some days I was just there and I just read my emails and I answered emails. I didn't have any serious meetings or anything that was too strenuous. It was just enough to just be in the office without breaking down. So as a leader, I would say a lot of empathy and realizing that this is a phase. It is back to just being okay, because being at work can be hard. Also, it can be helpful to a lot of people because you're focusing on something, and so it can be part of the healing for you. I will share one more thing, and that is, if I look back at something I may regret, then is that I use my work as a defense mechanism. if I worked around the clock, then I didn't think about how sad I was. And so in the beginning, after the first couple of months when I was too broken to do anything, but when I did get back to work, I went full in, and I would say even too much. And I wasn't very good at listening to my own mind and body. Didn't relax, didn't rest, didn't sleep, didn't anything. So make sure that people don't use work as an escape route, because it may hurt more than it heals in the end. It's tricky, but yeah, again, the key comes from the inside, and try to listen to that voice telling you what you need to heal.
Thank you. Those were great examples. The next question is, how did you study the gospel to find real doctrine, to find answers, and the quotes that you found to help? Did you find that was different from cultural teachings or commonly accepted norms or ideas of how to move forward or deal with unwanted loss?
I missed the second part. Would you repeat from the second half? I didn't hear it.
Yes. Sorry. Did you find that your gospel study was different from cultural teachings or commonly accepted norms or ideas of how to move forward or deal with unwanted loss?
Ah, excellent question. Oh, I love that. So as a Swedish person, we're very straightforward and very direct. So this is going to be not so diplomatic. I found that when you look at the surface of the gospel, it may seem like they have the simple answers, like, well, you're going to see him again, so don't be sad. Or you have the gospel, so you have nothing to be sad about. Or we believe in a second life, so don't be sad, And so where you reach the surface, that is kind of the easy way out and the easy answers, and the maybe what culture is also promoting. Whereas if you get to the depth of things, that's where you have the truly comforting words. I've shared many of those today, and I feel like deep down, the core of the gospel is completely empathetic and understanding and comforting and helpful, knowing that Christ knows how I feel. He wants to help me. There's nothing superficial about that. And so the depth of the gospel is where I found my peace. I remember I went through this phase of studying everything I could about the next life and death and life and the spirit world, which was helpful, but where I really truly found the comfort, it wasn't the core of the gospel, the depth of it, rather than just the superficial, don't be sad because you're going to see one another, again someday. That wasn't helpful. But the core, my relationship with Christ, knowing that deep down things are going to be okay, even if they don't turn out the way I want them to, that was helpful.
Thank you. And kind of going along with that, we have another question that talks about this culture of trying to fix things. So it says, in the church, we tend to have a culture of trying to fix things rather than just to accept some things. What's your advice on knowing when to fix and when to accept?
I would say often let the person take the lead, because if you're just if you're in a very, like I said, vulnerable and sad state, that isn't really the time to say, right, I have a solution. You're going to think about this and this instead. Whereas if the person says, I'm feeling this darkness and I really want to find my way out of it, what can I do to feel better? Let the person take the lead, because that's when there's a saying that says, it's an old Indian saying that says, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And that's very helpful to apply in this situation as well. When the person is ready to fix something, you will know, because they will be looking for solutions or talking about them. Whereas when you're just feeling overwhelmed with the depth of sadness, that's not the time to start talking about, well, here's a scripture that's going to make all of this go away. So yeah, just follow the person's lead and you'll figure out soon enough where they are.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Another question we received says, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about how grief and depression are related. Can your suggestions for how to help someone who is dealing with grief also be applied to someone with depression?
I would be very careful in that way. Some of the advice, yes, but what I've been talking about, grief being a natural process that you are going to heal naturally, may not be true for depression. It probably will not be true for depression. With depression, you are going to need professional help. And that help may look different. It may be therapy, maybe medication, maybe all kinds of things. Whereas grief is I would say that's a natural process that we can trust that it will eventually heal by itself, getting some help along the way. People trying to rush that process will not help. And there are some people who are frozen in grief, but I would say that's a very, very small percentage. And so when it comes to some of the advice, such as let the person lead, it may or may not be helpful, because if a person is severely depressed, they won't lead to a healthy place, so to speak. And you may have to, I'm not going to say override, but you may need to make them see that they need more help than what they feel that they're ready to accept at that time. So I would be quite careful not to mix those two up, because like I said, grief is a natural process that will heal by itself, getting some help, whereas depression may not, the symptoms may be similar, deep sadness, but if they're coming from different from different backgrounds, I would say that again, professional help is good for anyone. Like I said, I was lucky enough to have a friend who's a grief therapist, so she gave me some advice along the way. But I didn't feel like I needed medical attention to get through my issues. Whereas with depression, I would say, you do need some professional help to find your solutions to ways out of it. But meeting people with empathy is always helpful. Not trying to shove trite phrases down somebody's throat. that's never helpful, no matter what. So some things are similar, but I would be careful to mix those two up.
Thank you. That's great advice. Another question we received is, I know you kind of talked about how there really is no normal after something like that happens. But the question says, have you been able to find true happiness in your life again? And how do you keep the dark feelings of your child from taking over your thoughts in the quiet moments of life? Do you have to work harder to keep the positivity in your life? And if so, isn't it tiring?
Wow. So many good questions. That was a lot of good questions as one. So you may have to repeat parts of them after a while. So the first part was, have you found true happiness again? I would say yes. And I never would have thought. I thought it would be impossible for me to ever be remotely happy again. There is a wound in me that will always be there. I would say a scar, but you can absolutely be happy again. I would say that's even the natural state to find happiness again. However, it's going to look different. Bonnie mentioned it first. For instance, I picked up scuba diving a couple of years ago. I never would have thought that I would do something crazy like that, but I've kind of one way I've helped myself feel is, okay, I'm just going to spoil myself. I'm going to do what makes me happy, what helps me find joy in life. So there are things that you can do to not deny yourself of happiness. And I think imposing sadness for the rest of your life is also not the way it's supposed to be. God would want us to be unhappy because of it. So again, just try to think of healthy things that will make you feel good. And the answer is absolutely, you can find happiness again. Not by necessarily replacing what you had with something similar. It may look different. For instance, people saying, well, if they lost a child, somebody said, well, you can have another child. Yeah, it's not the same thing. So it's not a matter of replacing what you had. It's rebuilding your life in a different way around the gaping hole that you once had, and it will eventually close and look different. And you can find a new happy life, looking different from what you had. So that was the first part of the question, but there were lots of elements to it. Please repeat
yes.
parts.
Okay, the next question within that question was, how do you keep the dark feelings of your child from taking over your thoughts in the quiet moments of life?
Excellent question. The answer is I don't. The answer is I stay true to how I feel, in the sense that I know that sadness Sadness in itself is a feeling that the soul wants to get rid of, so to speak. So again, I'm using the roller coaster parable because it really, really works. It will go up and down. And if you try to force the valleys, it's not going to work. And if you try to think about, I will not think about being sad. What are you going to think about? You're going to think about being sad, right? So it's much, much better to, when you're sad, be sad, because it will pass. The natural state is for the soul and your body and your mind to heal itself. And so trust the process, allow that process. Don't try to force one way or the other. I remember in the beginning when my friend told me that children, the way they grieve, and this was right after the funeral, and we had some family over, and my cousin shared a childhood memory, and I laughed out loud, and I thought to myself, what are you doing? You're just laughing, you're just, buried your husband. And I said, well, this is because this is my body's way of regulating how much grief I can handle in the moment. And so I try to just hold on to the roller coaster, not try to focus too much on, oh no, I'm sad again, I have to make it go away, because you can't force it to go away. It will go away if you allow that feeling in that moment. And I think that if over an extended period, if you realize that those dark feelings aren't going away, yeah, then again, you do need more help. But grief as a process and as an experience it's natural. And the natural reaction is to find healing. So just allow it. It will go away.
Great, thank you. Another question we received is, have you ever experienced a sort of imposter syndrome when you're out around people because you feel broken inside and everyone else seems so normal?
Yes, big fat yes. Yeah, but then again, yeah, of course. I have a wonderful poker face when I need to, because yeah, how can I put this? Yeah. Ooh, that's a difficult one to explain. I do feel sometimes like everyone else looks normal and I feel broken inside. Then again, I tend to think we all have weights to carry. We all have burdens that we can't see. And I would love to see a world in which we're more open with one another, instead of, again, I mentioned toxic positivity. That's the thing that really rubs me the wrong way, because with all of this focus, which is a good focus on finding the good things in life, we tend to negate or deny the fact that there is also sadness. And so I think that we shouldn't feel the need to be imposters just because we're, for a moment, allowing ourselves to just go along with things, because also grieving can be exhausting. And sometimes it was nice to be anonymous and not, have the widow stamp across my face. That's also a good feeling sometimes, just saying, okay, right, yeah, people don't need to know my story right now. I don't need to dwell on this. So there's nothing negative about realizing that I feel broken right now, even though the others don't, because the chances are that somebody else will feel the same way. So some honesty in our relationships is helpful. And of course, it shouldn't go to either extreme, but yeah, everyone has their off days. And so let's just give each other grace.
That's great, thank you. Another question we received is, did you ever experience any sort of feeling of guilt in the grieving process?
So many good questions here. The guilt is a very, very normal feeling around grief. I didn't, because of the fact that I think the grief is more, the guilt is more tightly connected when somebody has been ill for a long time and then they pass on, and some people may feel a slight relief in their behalf, and that's when the guilt normally comes. I didn't have any of that. My husband was perfectly healthy until he died, and so I felt like I didn't have anything to regret. Our last words that we said to each other was, "I love you," and so I didn't feel the need to feel guilt for anything. And I think that even if you were to have a loved one that dies from severe illness, and you may feel, a sense of relief in their behalf, not having to suffer, it's also a natural feeling. And try not to latch onto it, but just allow it to flow through you, and it will flow. I was lucky in that I didn't have that situation. Then again, for me, it was more of a shock because I had no preparation for it. I didn't know this was coming. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. But yeah, it's a natural feeling, and I think the theme of how I'm answering these questions is really any negative or positive feeling that you have, allow it to pass through you, because it will, with time, you will heal.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time for questions, but thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for being willing to answer so many questions that are difficult to answer. But yeah, we just wanted to say thank you for joining us, and thank you to all of our audience members for joining us as well. And we hope that you all have a great rest of your day. So thank you again, Ellen.
Thank you for the good you do.